going to get straight into it with a verse from the Bible. Ecclesiastes 4 verses 9 to 12 should be up on the screen. Two are better than one because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. Also, if two lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can anyone keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. Almost 16 years ago, I attended my last drug rehabilitation centre, and it's where I got saved. On that particular occasion, I'd landed myself on the other side of the country, in South Africa, from where I'd grown up, and I didn't have much more than the clothes I had on my back, and even the pair of shoes I had, I'd swapped those for my last hit to get high before I got admitted. This was my second last rehab in a string of about, 8 to 10, ranging from institutions for troubled youths to long-term facilities, short-term facilities, and everything in between. But on this particular occasion, I knew I was coming to the end of my rope, sort of my rock bottom, and I was running out of lives. And I just had a good sense that if I didn't get it right this time, I probably wouldn't have another chance. At this rehab, was where I first started attending church. It was a first for me. And we were bussed through there on a Sunday evening, sort of whether we liked it or not. And you could either stare at the floor or you could pay attention. But either way, you were going to be there. And it was during that first worship session on my first evening that my fresh off the street tough guy image just absolutely fell apart. I cried my eyes out so much that they had to take me out so I can sort of compose myself. Quite embarrassing thinking back to it now, but I just couldn't help it. Something inside of me just sort of fell apart. And all those barriers and walls and things that I'd built up just collapsed. That next Sunday service, I was the first to raise my hand and commit my life to Jesus. I didn't really understand what they were talking much about. I mean, a lot didn't line up in my head. I had so many questions about God, about Jesus, about a talking snake at the beginning of the Bible. Just all sorts, but I just couldn't shake that hope that was flooding into my bones, bringing life back to me. I absolutely ate through the Bible in the first 6 months of being there. After the first 6 months, we were allowed to start working, and we were allowed to attend as many church events and services as we liked. So I was there at every opportunity. Up to that point, most of my life, I'd always felt like an outsider. I'd always felt like I needed to prove myself. But in this community and that church, something just felt different. I started making friends, and these guys just seemed to trust me, even though they knew who I was and where I was from. They weren't putting me in charge of the tithes and offerings bucket, but they genuinely treated me like everyone else, and soon I was just one of the crew there. I was setting up on church on a Sunday morning and packing down after that, but followed by a bit of touch rugby and a braai or barbecue. I became one of the guys. And for the first time in a long time, I felt normal. I didn't feel like I had this big stain of drug addiction written across my chest that everyone could see. And the real Dane was starting to come alive again. One of the hardest things about coming off drugs is not always so much the drugs, but rather just learning how to live a normal life again. When you've been doing something for so long, that lifestyle and that culture becomes a norm. And that false version of yourself that builds up becomes all you know. So when you come out of it, it's a bit like a fish out of water. You don't know how to handle things. And you're sort of racked with anxiety a lot of the time because you just feel like no one trusts you. And then you have the devil whispering things into your head like, you're a fraud. They don't really trust you. It's just a matter of time until they find out who you really are. And apart from that, everyone has progressed so far in life over the years you've been using. And it just really overwhelms you just when you think about how far behind you've fallen. And, you need to find a job, you need to find somewhere to stay. And a lot of the time it's just easy to go back to what you know. But on this particular occasion, in that church and in that community, it felt different. Things were changing for me and I could see a hope on the horizon. I found Jesus and he had saved me. But it was through that community that was beginning to heal me. We're in the month of March, and we've been speaking about beautiful connections. We've had some great messages. We've even had a panel which my wife was on. And I'm going to be carrying on with that topic, and I'll be speaking a bit about community. And it's something about this church that I've always loved. I've always had a big sense of community since day one that I've been here. So in a sense, it feels like I'm preaching to the choir. You guys know how to do this really well. But even as we've grown, that sense of community has grown with us. And it's great. And I just really believe it's something we need to protect, we need to cherish, and we need to be really thankful for. If I'm honest, community has never really come that easy to me. Standing with a group of people I didn't know used to frighten me quite a bit. And I could easily spend the weekend by myself, or even a week by myself. I'm more, if you're classed, I'm more sort of introvert type of person. And some of us are wired that way, and some of us aren't. You know, some of us are more energized by crowds. But if you look at the daily rhythm of Jesus, he would spend time with the crowds, and then he would be alone with God. I'm not saying Jesus was an introvert or extrovert, but there was a rhythm to his daily walk. You know, he would go and spend time with his Father, and in a sense recharge his batteries, rest in the Lord, listening to his guidance. And then he would go back and display that love and kindness and patience received from the Father on individuals in the community again. In a sense, when we adopt this rhythm in our walk, we spend time with Jesus, we become like Jesus, because we become like those that we spend time with. So it's almost as if community and solitude, they sound like opposites, but they actually work together with each other. It's almost like an inhale. You inhale spending time alone with Jesus, and then you exhale in the community. Grace spoke about this really well a few weeks ago. And following Jesus will always draw us to people. Wherever his spirit is, there will always be a sense of community, a will in us to connect with one another. Whenever I'm here, whenever I come to this church, I feel that spirit of community. I'm always trying to hook up with someone for a coffee. Martin Ring will know this all the time. I'm always wanting to meet up with someone in the week, because there's a spirit of community in this church that the Holy Spirit brings. And sadly, they're often, Monday rolls around like it's swallowed up by the week, and you know, it's just the way life goes sometimes. But community is a kingdom concept. God at the center of his being is communal. Right at the beginning in Genesis 1, the Bible speaks of let us make, not me, but us. So we have God, the one who creates the heavens and the earth, and we have the Spirit of God, or the Spirit within God, who fills that whole creation. And then we have the Word of God, later revealed in Jesus, through whom God is authoring and ordering creation. So God is communal. He's one being, but he's three persons, otherwise known as the Trinity. And like God that created us, that he is communal, we are made in his image, meaning that we are designed and made for community. In Genesis, God commands Adam and Eve to be fruitful and increase in number, calling us to create community, build roads, and connect to one another, spreading his image across the world, using our individual talents and personalities to further creation and to serve one another. But unfortunately, as we know, when we read further in our story, sin enters, and not only causes a separation between us and God, but it causes separation between one another. When sin came in, it brought with it its mates guilt and shame. And guilt and shame is what causes us, what creates distance between us, because we tend to wear fig leaves to cover parts of ourselves we don't want others to see. We develop a false self, a front we walk around with, or hide or disguise our true selves. And this drives a wedge in the community that God has created us to live in. The plan of the enemy has always been to isolate us. And the world has done a great job to subtly lure us into the idea that self-dependency is the key to successful life. Commitment, relationship, those type of things seem a bit outdated, a bit old school. Being self-made, self-sufficient, extracting all we can out of this life for our individual kingdoms and purposes seems to be the aim of the day. The success, achievements, wealth that we often chase isolates us. And don't get me wrong, I'm all for hard work, I'm all for making a success of our lives, but we often don't keep it the right side up. Many of us spend our lives trying to keep up with the constantly shifting goalposts of our neighbors, skimming through our lives in this blur of busyness, the busyness leading us to isolation as we try and get to the top of the food chain. There are far too many of us that are outwardly successful but internally lonely. in Matthew 12, verses 46 to 50, it should come up there. While Jesus was still talking to the crowd, his mother and his brothers stood outside, wanting to speak to him. Someone told him, your mother and your brothers are standing outside wanting to speak to you. He replied to him, who is my mother and who are my brothers? Pointing to his disciples, he said, here are my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and my sister and mother. Now when I first heard that, it comes across quite harsh, doesn't it? Yeah, it does. And it sort of didn't sound like the usual loving and compassionate Jesus that I used to read about. And I think even then it would have sounded maybe even a bit harsher in his context, because in ancient first century Israel, family was incredibly important. It was the ultimate. Growing up, if you were male, growing up as a male, you would usually take over your father's business. You never betrayed a brother. You always looked after your mom if your father had passed away. And your family name carried an incredible amount of importance. Who you were seen as came from who your family was. But I don't think Jesus was saying this then to tear down the old way of doing things, but I think he was rather introducing a kingdom family that we can all belong to and find our place in. When we commit our lives to following Christ, we are birthed into this new family with a father and many brothers and sisters. We all have this deep need to be seen, to feel valued, and to feel like we belong, like a family. And that's what he wanted his kingdom to be like. And he wants our church to be like. But it's through community that God works, using us, a friend, a brother or a sister, to be his hands and his feet, healing one another through friendship, through kindness, through generosity, laughter, or a word of correction. He speaks to us through the friends who know how to make us laugh and when to sit in silence, through the pastors at church, and through our neighbors' practical advice, through our doctors, through our wives, yes, men, he does, and through our children. It's in community that when I'm weak, someone else who's strong can help me. When I'm strong, I can help someone else who is weak. It's where we get to use our giftings and our talents and our personality traits given to us by God to strengthen one another. Polish-born Rabbi Menachem Mendel said, people are God's language. We often expect God's voice to be this rumbling revelation in a time of prayer or an inner whisper, which is often true. But in my experience, it's often in the everyday actions of ordinary people. Sometimes the only place we can find God is in one another. Not in prayer, not in the Bible, not in worship, but in community. For some reason, we won't understand fully this side of Eden, but he has always done his work through us, his image bearers. Saint Augustine said many, many years ago, without God we cannot, without us he will not. Another quote from a guy by the name of Mike Mason said, many Christians would rather look into their Bibles than into the eyes of a fellow human being. Many pray, Lord, I want to be close to you, and yet never do anything to get close to those around him. But God has designed it that the route to him often lies through other people. In the book of Acts, we read about a community or the early church being formed, swept up by the power of the Holy Spirit. We read about this wild generosity and miracles and a real countercultural community and many, many people coming to the Lord. And this was in a period of quite intense persecution. So you would think people would be running the other way. But the church just kept growing as they met in one another's houses and so on. And I'm sure a lot of people became Christians because of the signs and the wonders and the miracles that were seen. But I think more so was that sense of community in that time of persecution. That unity, that generosity, that sense of caring, that countercultural community, it must have been really, really attractive. We read about it a bit in Acts 4 verses 32. It says, all the believers were in one heart and mind. No one claimed that any of their possessions was their own, but they shared everything that they had. The next one's Acts 2. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. Has anybody heard of the experiment called Rat Park? No. All right. So basically it was an experiment done in the late 1970s, and it's been spoken about quite a bit on TED Talks and these type of things. But basically, this was before animal rights and things like that, so just bear with me. But they would take a cage rat, an isolated cage rat, or a few of them, and they would give them 2 bottles of water. One bottle had just water, and the other bottle was laced with water, laced with heroin and cocaine. In each experiment, the rat would always prefer the drug water and almost always kill itself within a couple of weeks. So obviously they thought, hold on, this is a rat that's isolated. It's got nothing else to do. Obviously he's going to choose to get high. So what they did was they developed something called Rat Park. And Rat Park was like a heaven for rats. Everything a rat could want was in Rat Park. They had lovely food. They have lots of other rats. Lots of other rats to befriend and to mate with. They had colored balls, spinning wheels, cheese, everything. Plus water bottles. Those 2 water bottles. One with water and the one with drug water. But the fascinating part in Rat Park, they didn't like the drug water. They hardly used it. None of them overdosed. And when tried, none of them would use it in a way that looked like compulsion or addiction. And I know these are rats we're talking about, and we're humans, so there's a lot of difference. But the observations made in those experiments about living in a healthy community versus in isolation sparked a lot of discussion and change in the way they treated addiction. Community is a gift, and friendship is a gift. But if we're honest, and we always should be in church settings, community can also be hard and even hurtful at times. Whether we're in any sort of community for long enough, be it this church, a football team, workplace, we will experience some sort of conflict or disappointment. Bad Christians happen to good people all the time. People can be difficult, complicated, messy, and disappointing. But so can I, and so can you at times. But those same people can also inspire us. They can love us, they can encourage us, and they can bring out the best in us. They can make us come alive like nothing else can. Community is what we are made for. It'll always be what's best for us, but it's a commitment, and we have to be in it for the long haul. There'll be good seasons and good times, and there'll be bad seasons. But the key is to stay planted, because in that soil of sacrificed time that the roots of friendship are allowed to grow and to get strong. I skipped a part here, which I just realized, but I feel like I need to mention it because it really was sort of special to us. We've recently had our 3rd child, my last child. The thing was, before the childbirth, I was sort of preparing myself, not for a sad childbirth, but I'm not sad because I didn't have family around, is what I'm trying to say. It would be different for my other 2. All my family were around and so on. But just the community, you guys that came around us and were there and supplied meals and were just there, just friends to us, meant so much to myself and Cherie and to our kids. And apart from that, I've witnessed some of us in this church go through really hard and challenging times recently. And the sense of community in this church, how we've pulled together and prayed for them and tried to help them and serve them has been really, really good to see. Right at the beginning I said that was my second last rehab, and it was my second last rehab. Things were going really well for me, and I was on my longest run of being clean. I've been clean for over a year. I started working and I was earning some decent money, but one day I drove through the city and my trained eye caught the movements of dealers and users doing their usual daily dance. The moment stuck with me for a while, and I sort of entertained the thought. And in a moment of weakness, a few days later, I thought I'd get high just one last time, for old time's sake. I figured things were going well, and I deserved to reward myself. That one for old time's sake didn't just stay one, it never does. I never went back to work. I called in sick that day, and that was the last they heard of me. I very quickly ran out of money, so I asked the friends who might give me those friends at church. And some of them did, but most of them didn't, because they knew I'd relapsed, they'd heard, and they'd seen. Anyway, by the time I ran out of all my resources, in the evenings I'd go past their houses and I'd steal from their yards and break into their garages and find whatever I could to sell for drugs. So I knew that they would never report me to the police. In a spell that lasted about 2 months, I ended up selling my bed, my fridge, whatever the pawn shop would take. And I quickly found myself on the streets again and eventually ended up in a jail cell arrested for theft. I was on the other side of the country and my usual cries for help and my family were far, far away. But it was that community, those friends that I'd made at the beginning, who had trusted me and then I'd stole from and disappointed deeply, they came through for me. It was them that were the first to respond to my cries for help in that jail cell. Community is a gift, friends, a gift from God. And in 5 or 10 years time from now, we won't remember the tasks that seem so incredibly important to us right now. We'll remember the people that were around us. Sometimes we need reminding, as I certainly do. And we can go from here and not make an effort, and we can devote ourselves to something else. But one thing I know is that when we're breathing our last few breaths in this life, it's not the achievements, it's not the bucket list, the amount of stamps in our passports that we will look at, but the time we got to spend with those that we love and that loved us. None of the other stuff that screamed importance will matter. It's the people around us that will matter. So today, perhaps where we've unintentionally neglected our friends or been too busy for family, now might be the time to reprioritize. If there's unresolved conflict between us and a family member or friend and it's slowly eating away at that relationship, now might be the time to choose to make things right. And then one last quote from a guy by the name of John Tyson. The great threat to your family is not the next presidential election, not the global economy, not the foreign wars. The great threat is that you skim through your life and miss the ordinary wonder and magic happening in the most important sacred relationships that God has given you.